Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. You are listening to the Revolution Health Radio Show. I'm your host, Steve Wright, co-author at scdlifestyle.com. This episode of RHR is brought to you by 144.me. Now, if you haven't heard of this program yet, it's a program that Chris put together that's designed to reset your lifestyle over a 14-day period. And it's going to do that through sort of the foundational steps that we are usually talking about on the podcast, things like diet, sleep, movement, and stress. And if you've ever tried to implement healthy habits in your life, you know that it can be very hard to sort of integrate them into daily life and stick with them when things come up. And so what Chris has done is he's created this program to really walk you through step by step using the best knowledge that we have today from science and habit formation on how you can really implement these throughout your life and do it sort of in one big reset. So if you haven't yet, check out 144.me. That's 14four.me. All right, on with the podcast. With me is integrative medical practitioner, healthy skeptic, and New York Times bestselling author Chris Kresser. Chris, how's your day going?
Oh, it's good. Lots of fun stuff going on. Busy as usual, but also just enjoying the beginnings of summer here and spending more time outside. How about you?
Yeah, I'm having a delicious day. And
That's unexpected.
Yeah.
I like it though.
I'm trying to be done with the good, great, cool type of things. I'm trying to, come up with some different words.
Well, I will expect a new adjective from you on every podcast. That's your homework.
I'm gonna have to think about this.
Break out the dictionary, the thesaurus. Yeah. So we have a really great question today about intermittent fasting. So let's give it a listen.
Hi, Chris. You often talk about your own practice of intermittent fasting on the show, and I've been doing some reading about it. There's some debate about the utility of intermittent fasting for females due to special hormone and reproductive considerations. My own personal situation, my hormones have always been a little bit out of whack, and I have very low adrenal functioning and low hormone production across the board. But I've been reading about intermittent fasting as a way to improve my insulin sensitivity and potentially also drop that last 5 to 10 pounds that I've been trying to lose. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about intermittent fasting on your show, and if you could share some recommendations for how often someone should intermittent fast, say once a week, twice a week. If you recommend that they pair that with caloric restriction or simply restrict the window of time that someone eats during the day. And lastly, I'm wondering if there are any special considerations that you have for women or for other health conditions in general. Thanks so much for your time. I look forward to your answer.
All right. Well, thank you, Cody. This is, of course, something that's of interest to a number of people. We get this question a lot, either through the podcast or on the blog from my patients. And it is something that I think there's a bit of confusion about. When you look at the research on intermittent fasting, I would say it's mixed. There's definitely some research that suggests that it is beneficial for weight loss and also more particularly the improvement of metabolic markers, blood sugar, lipids, and things like that. But I think the confusion arises because for the same reason that it arises on a number of different subjects is if we try to ask the question, is intermittent fasting a good idea, and just answer it, with a yes or no, that's never going to work because, as I always say, at the risk of beating a dead horse, there's no one-size-fits-all approach, and intermittent fasting could be a good idea or it could be a terrible idea, depending on your circumstances. And those circumstances might change even over a given period of time for a given person. So it's not even accurate to say intermittent fasting is a good idea for this person, but not for that person, because those circumstances that determine whether it's a good idea can change over time.
And I can echo that because I've played with this extensively, and I have noticed that over the last 6 years.
Yeah. So I'll be curious to hear about your experience. Let's talk a little bit about some of the scenarios and situations where it is a good idea. it's something that I would think about with patients when rapid weight loss is desirable, when their blood sugar is elevated and there's some insulin and leptin resistance, maybe dyslipidemia. When those patients, when those patients, if they have those situations or those circumstances, and overall, otherwise they are in relatively good health. So they're not dealing with a really serious chronic infection. They're not dealing with, like chronic fatigue type of problem. Their adrenals are your HPA axis. If you've been listening to this for a while, I use the adrenal term tongue in cheek, but their whole system that governs stress tolerance and stress management is in relatively decent shape. They're sleeping pretty well. If they meet all those requirements, then I'm certainly happy to entertain intermittent fasting as a strategy for improving their health, helping with weight loss and helping improve blood sugar and lipid markers. I said something about chronic infection being a contraindication for intermittent fasting. Paul Jaminet and some other folks have written about intermittent fasting as a way of dealing with chronic infection because it upregulates a process called autophagy that may be helpful in dealing with chronic infections. In my own practical experience, I've seen kind of mixed results with intermittent fasting for chronic infection. If somebody's just really exhausted and they're really their HPA axis is really shot, which it often is with chronic infection, intermittent fasting can often, in my experience, take people in the wrong direction who are dealing with those symptoms. But in some cases, I have seen an improvement, and it may be in part from just giving the digestive system a rest, and that leaves more energy for fighting the infection, or it may be because of the upregulation of autophagy.
I got an interesting nugget on that from my personal life. So I started playing around with intermittent fasting back in like 2009 when I started my entire health journey before I even had switched my diet over. And I have done all the different methods out there. You name the person, I've tried it. And about a couple years into it, I would always, do it for a while and then quit, and do it for a while and quit. I started doing like 24-hour fast, and sometimes, just dinner to dinner type fast. And every once in a while, I would start getting these awful pains in my stomach about 12 hours, 8 to 14 hours into the fast. And so I contacted some of the experts who write about intermittent fasting. I'm like, hey, have you ever heard of this? No one had any ideas, never heard of this, didn't know what was happening. Fast forward to, I don't know, about a month ago, and I'm talking with Dr. Steven Sandberg-Lewis. He's a gastroenterology teacher up in the Portland Naturopathic Clinic, and he was helping me out with some research on heartburn. And he was saying that it's very common for people with H. pylori and inflammation of the stomach to get pains if they fast in their stomach. And it turned out I had H. pylori back then, and I had treated it since. And so this just to go along with the infection things.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a big, I mean, it's kind of a side note. I don't want to go too far down that road, but it is a big red flag. If you have pain on an empty stomach, that's a big red flag for H. pylori and other possible gut infections, for sure. So that's a very interesting tidbit there. So yeah, I mean, those are the typical circumstances when we would think about intermittent fasting. Now, on the other side of the coin, the circumstances in which I would be cautious to recommend intermittent fasting include some of the things that Cody mentioned in the question, which is if there's hormone imbalance, if a woman is trying to maximize fertility, unless that woman is really overweight and has blood sugar issues, in which case, intermittent fasting may actually move the needle in a positive direction. But if that's not the case, if weight and insulin and leptin resistance aren't preventing fertility, standing in the way, and the woman's just generally trying to maximize fertility, I probably wouldn't recommend it. If someone has pretty significant HPA axis dysregulation or adrenal fatigue, so that would manifest as feeling tired when you wake up in the morning, even if you get enough sleep, having afternoon energy crashes, not being able to fall asleep or stay asleep, your quality of sleep is poor, you have poor stress tolerance, poor exercise recovery or exercise tolerance. These kind of classic signs of I'm doing air quotes here, adrenal fatigue. In my experience, intermittent fasting usually makes those patients worse. Now, so far we've been talking about intermittent fasting as if you're doing it every day or you're not doing it on any days. And of course, that doesn't have to be like that. As I have often discussed, and if you've been listening to the show for a while, sometimes when Steve asks me what I've had for breakfast, the answer is coffee and coffee and cream, which is intermittent fasting. Sometimes the answer is a relatively large breakfast. And so I've mentioned this before, but the way I approach intermittent fasting is I do it when I feel like it, or I do it when my life circumstances call for it. Like my morning just got away from me and I have a lot going on, and it just feels like to rush eating a breakfast, inhaling my food, in between commitments just doesn't make sense. And I would rather just, fast and be a little bit more deliberate with my morning. But I have gotten to the point, and I'm curious where you're at, Steve, where I can just kind of check in with my body and based on how I'm feeling, determine whether, eating makes more sense or not eating makes more sense. And the kind of triggers that I look for would be, if I had a good night of sleep, if I'm feeling rested, I'm feeling, strong overall, I'm just all of the cylinders are firing, so to speak, then that's a good morning for me to, fast if I feel like it. If I have had a crappy night of sleep, or I'm feeling just unusually tired or run down for any reason, then I'm probably not going to do that, because I think I'll usually feel worse in that situation. So I think eventually, after you experiment a bit and go periods of time where you're intermittent fasting, periods of time where you're not, you'll get a sense of how it makes you feel, and then you'll be able to make that determination yourself.
Yeah, I think what you just mentioned is really important. If you're looking at your life and you're consistently not getting quality sleep due to life circumstances like a newborn baby or something like that, or a big project at work, or if your stress is extra high because you're moving, those are probably not the best times to be intermittent fasting. And whenever I've actually attempted intermittent fasting those times, that's when it's like agonizing and it doesn't add value to my life. It seems like more of the times when I'm kind of in flow, and like you said, I just look in the refrigerator, I'm like, I didn't go to the store and I should have. Okay, well, I'll just fast until dinner or something like that. Mm-hmm. Those seem to be how I do it these days.
Yeah, that's sort of like lifestyle-based intermittent fasting, which is fine. I mean, that's, in a way, that mimics the ancestral pattern, right? Like, oops, we didn't have a successful hunt, so we're gonna be fasting now.
Yeah, I think the other time that I try to use it, this comes from Brad Pilon. He's one of the fasting people out there. He's got a pretty good book, is around events when I know I'm going to overeat. So like I'll do it like the day after Thanksgiving or something like that. Or, if I'm just kind of going to know I'm going to be eating out a lot and eating a ton of quote unquote paleo treats or whatever, I might fast the day before that weekend or that trip or something like that, just to kind of store up some calories.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's another circumstance. Sometimes I'll do it when I'm flying. We've talked about this before. I'll often bring my own food on a plane, but in some cases I'll just fast completely, from my house to wherever I end up, and use that as an opportunity and just focus on other things while I'm traveling. If I feel like I'm coming down with a cold or some kind of viral thing, I often find that fasting is helpful, or at least just eating more sparingly. So that's another situation where it might be helpful. In terms of Cody's question, there are a couple other kind of sub-questions there. One was if it's recommended to pair intermittent fasting with caloric restriction, or simply restrict the window of time that somebody eats during the day. I'd say my recommendation is not to actually count calories for most people when they're intermittent fasting, and just eat, restrict the food and restrict the window of time that you're eating. So you might eat all of your meals between 12 and 7 p.m. and then not eat anything outside of that. And, different people will have different experiences. If you're trying to lose weight, you can still lose. Typically, a lot of people will still lose weight even if they're not purposely restricting calories. If they're just compressing their food intake into that window, they may still lose weight because there's an involuntary calorie restriction that happens, and they get an improvement in insulin sensitivity and leptin sensitivity, that maybe the types of food that they're eating will change and how they're metabolizing that food will change. So in most cases, I just recommend that people focus on restricting the window of time that you eat. If you are doing daily intermittent fasting in a compressed food intake window, like 12 to 7 p.m., and it's going really well for you and you're really liking it and you're getting a lot out of it, one way that you can kind of up the ante is do a, bi-weekly, monthly, or even weekly 36-hour fast where you, from 7 p.m. until 12 noon the following day. So let's say 7 p.m. on Thursday, you stop eating, then you don't eat again until 12 p.m. on Saturday. So that's another way of fasting intermittently. And in that circumstance, you would definitely be decreasing your overall calorie intake in a given week by skipping that day of food intake. So there are a lot of different ways to do it. And ultimately, it really just comes down to what makes the most sense for you given your health status, your goals, and then your circumstances and lifestyle.
Yeah, I think I've definitely used to do like kind of 2 or 3 24-hour fasts per week. And I think they're good. I think where intermittent fasting becomes a potential downside if you're doing it on a month by month basis, other than all the other health stuff we talked about, is if you stop being social. Because, like, for instance, everybody's going to go to a dinner party, but today was your fast day, and you just, you don't want to be in that environment and be smelling that kind of stuff. And so I think that's one thing I became aware of too, is like, I think fasting's kind of affecting my social pattern, and I'm not cool with that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's fine for short periods of time too, if you have a particular goal, but it's a really good example that you bring up because it's we're always having to balance these different choices that we're making. When we make one choice, that choice tends to have repercussions in other areas of our life. And, if you maximize one area of your health and you put all your energy into that, let's say your nutrition and your diet, then it's very likely you're going to go out of balance in other areas of your life. And, I tried to address this in my book by talking about the importance of pleasure and social connection and fun and some of these, and having a sense of purpose in your life, because I really believe that having this kind of balance is, arguably more important than dealing, like optimizing the last 5 to 10 to 15% of any one particular category. And if you look around at some of the healthiest and most successful people, you'll see that that's true for most of them, is they do have, they have a rich life. So that's what this is all about ultimately, is creating a life that we love living and having, a meaningful, a sense of meaning and purpose and rich social connections and fun, and that we enjoy our life and we love, being here on this planet. And health is, optimizing our nutrition and is a big part of that, but it can be easy to get a little carried away there, as we all know.
Yeah. And I do want to just say that, many listeners might not know, but some might know that I used to be 60 pounds heavier than what I am now. And part of how I lost a decent chunk of that weight was through changing my diet and then incorporating the intermittent fasting 2 to 3 days a week into my life. And so that back then was obviously a really important goal to me. And I think I like the fact that intermittent fasting plays so well into a real food diet. You're not like eating some of the crazy bodybuilding diets or any sort of quote unquote calorie counting. You're just saying, hey, I'm not going to eat from noon to noon or 7 p.m. to 7 p.m. or something like that.
That's right. It's really not making any changes on those levels. You're not restricting calories. You're not counting them. You're like you said, you're just doing what you're already doing, but you're doing it less frequently, or at particular times during the day. And that, the other thing we haven't even talked about, or I guess I alluded to it when I was saying that I will often do it in the morning when I'm busy and doing other things, but I sometimes get tired of eating and preparing food. I don't know about you, but I love food prep. I love, going to the farmer's market. I love everything around the process of food, but I have to say, sometimes it just gets old, and I just get really immersed in what I'm doing. And I'm a really passionate, pretty intense person. And so when I get wrapped up in something and I really dive in, like the idea of stopping to eat is sometimes not that appealing. And I think there's something to be said for that as well, as, like there's some freedom, for me at least, that comes from not being tied to a schedule of like, okay, at 8 o'clock I have to eat breakfast, and at 12 o'clock I have to eat lunch, and it's 7 o'clock I eat dinner. Like that kind of schedule and routine, while I generally stick to it because it's grounding for me, and because I'm intense and can easily kind of get so immersed in something that I just forget about everything else. Like having that routine normally is good for me, but it's also liberating to not be tied to that and to have days where I just have a completely different schedule of food intake, if only for that reason.
No, yeah, I think most people who get more connected to their food and spend more energy on it, every once in a while have that moment of like, wow, this is amazing. I have to eat every day to live, but I'm really not into it right now.
Yeah, you're like, wait, I just cooked and ate breakfast. Now I'm just about to cook and eat lunch, and wait, then I have to cook and eat dinner later. It's like, it can be a lot. So, especially because that's not the only thing that most of us are doing during the day. So, yeah. It just a side note, but it's actually not it's not really a side note, because I think that, we could call that a kind of spiritual aspect of intermittent fasting too, where it just, for some people is, if we can get like a little addicted to certain aspects of food or certain types of food, or our relationship to food, if it starts to feel a little bit out of whack, then intermittent fasting can be one way of resetting that, or just fasting, overall. Like one of the, in the past when I've done longer fasts and either associated with meditation retreats, or, longer meditation retreats where I was only eating once a day, I found that to be really liberating and also really instructive. It really kind of shined the light on my relationship with food and certain aspects of that relationship that might not have been as healthy as I wanted it to be. And so it's a way of raising your awareness about how you relate to food too, I think, which is really valuable.
Oh, totally. It changed my world when I did a 3-day fast like 6 or 7 years ago. Because I grew up, the feedback I got is, oh, he's a growing boy and he has to eat all the time. And I did eat all the time, and it felt great, and food tastes wonderful. And so, I had bought into all the dogma about if I didn't eat, all these negative hormone consequences would happen. And then there's all these sort of priming hormones that can get set based on our rhythm. So if you normally eat around noon, it's likely that your hormones will be primed for that meal at noon the next day. And so I did a 3-day just like coffee and water fast just to test it. And it was so amazing to like realize, wow, I was just being primed by my environment, my past behavior. Like, I'm totally fine. It was very liberating.
Yeah, it is really liberating. And I recommend that everybody do that at least once, because it can really kind of set you free from some habitual patterns and beliefs around food. And that's I found that to be really valuable. So Cody, hope that answers your questions, and everybody keep your questions coming. We love hearing from you. And next time I'm going to have an announcement about the clinician training program, which is swimming along at a really increasingly fast pace. And I think we're going to be starting pre-enrollment as early as mid-August. So look forward to that for another announcement coming soon on the blog, and then on the next podcast.
Awesome, Chris. Well, I know everybody's waiting for that patiently, so that'll be good. In between episodes, if you would like to get your question answered, please go to chriskresser.com/podcast question to submit yours. And also, if you're not yet, make sure you're following Chris on social media. Go to facebook.com/Chris Kresser, L.Ac, twitter.com/Chris Kresser. If you're following him on these modalities, it's likely that you'll find out about topics he may be going to write about or we may talk about on the show ahead of time, and kind of get the latest access to what's going on and what he's thinking about. Thanks everyone for listening.